Okay, so our first presenter is Zach Medeiros, and he worked with Mike Milburn. He'll tell you about his work.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Zach Medeiros, and I did my psychology honor thesis titled Affect Displacement Theory, Authoritarianism, and the Denial of Environmental Destruction. This study was derived from the principles of affect displacement theory, which Professor Milburn has dedicated much of his career to investigating, as well as terror management theory. Affect displacement theory hypothesizes that children who are raised in emotionally distant, punitive environments where physical punishment is present tend to repress the emotions that they feel toward their parents and displace them onto more acceptable targets later on in life. These repressed emotions manifest in higher right-wing authoritarianism, or RWA, and greater support for punitive policies, particularly those policies that impact target groups such as criminals, minority groups, or those who challenge convention like activists. In 1995, Professor Milburn found that males high in childhood punishment were significantly more conservative than low punishment males, while high punishment females were more liberal than low punishment females. So in his book, co-authored by Dr. Sherry Conrad, Politics of Denial, it was first postulated that authoritarian denial contributes to overall conservative denial of global warming and the sort of backlash that has arisen in opposition to the environmental movement. So central to affect displacement theory is authoritarianism. The authoritarian personality is characterized by the idealization of authority, rigid worldview, avoidance of introspection, glorification of power, and a cynical distrust of others. Now, the authoritarian personality develops as a coping mechanism in order to deal with the overwhelming anger or shame that results from harsh child rearing and lack of emotional support in childhood. In her 1983 book, Alice Miller argued that denial is a key component to the authoritarian personality because it serves to keep those repressed emotions from childhood from entering one's consciousness. However, denial and the lack of introspection tend to exacerbate the displacement of these emotions onto the social world later in life because the roots of these issues are never dealt with. So several studies have found a link between authoritarianism and childhood punishment. The first, Dr. Milburn found that there was a significant relationship between childhood punishment and support for punitive policies even after controlling for parents' political ideology. Conservative support for policies associated with punitiveness, specifically force or retribution, such as the death penalty, anti-abortion, and use of military action, appeal to the authoritarian personality, particularly when these policies disadvantage outgroups like inmates or activists or even foreign nations. These policies provide ideal opportunities for authoritarians raised in punitive environments to displace the shame and rage that has been repressed for years and enact that retribution from the dominant position. So authoritarianism has also been found to be linked with social dominance orientation. High RWAs and high SDOs seek conformity to and the maintenance of the social order that already exists. Those who score high in these measures often view power discrepancies within society as both natural and justified. High RWAs and SDOs also hold more prejudiced, stereotypical views toward target groups as well. So in his analysis of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation, Altermeyer found that there are two distinct types of high authoritarians. He refers to the high RWA, low SDO individuals as RWA followers, and the high RWA and high SDO individuals as RWA leaders. RWA followers tend to adhere strictly to social norms and sort of seek out authoritative figures around which to shape the way they view the world. Whereas on the other hand, RWA leaders perceive themselves as superior and they seek competition through which to displace this aggression from childhood and gain a sense of power and dominance. So taken together, RWA and SDO can really account for a majority of the variance in measures of prejudice toward perceived outgroups. So now take a look at authoritarianism in the environment. So right-wing politicians who oppose environmental regulations tend to either deny the significance of these findings or seek to discredit sort of the credibility of the sources. So one survey offered participants a hypothetical scenario in which environmental protesters came out to protest this factory that was accused of polluting in a local river. And Peterson and his colleagues actually found that high RWAs expressed hostility toward the protesters rather than the polluters, whereas the opposite was found for low RWAs. And as I mentioned before, this study is also based on the principles of terror management theory. So terror management theory basically states that because humans have this capacity to recognize our own mortality, and because we fear death, terror management theory states that because individuals have the capacity to recognize our own mortality and we have this instinctive drive for survival, that we instinctively fear and try to avoid death. And so we create culture in order to sort of buffer us against thinking about our own mortality and the inevitability of death. So beliefs that conflict with our own culture and our own beliefs tend to threaten our sense of meaning, our sense of self-worth, and cause us anxiety. So the proponents of terror management theory have developed mortality salience, which is the manipulation used in this study, in order to challenge this denial of mortality and sort of threaten an individual's self-esteem or self-worth. So some studies have been done on how mortality salience impacts authoritarianism and authoritarian attitudes. It's been found that individuals with higher punishment backgrounds reported even greater defense of authoritarian attitudes following mortality salience manipulation, yet these attitudes decreased among those who reported low childhood punishment or not really histories of childhood punishment. So recognizing one's own mortality causes greater anxiety amongst high punishment individuals because mortality salience directly challenges these rigid set of worldviews that these individuals have developed that provide a sense of meaning and so henceforth threatening their sense of self-worth and self-meaning. So not too much has been done in terms of looking at the effects of mortality salience on environmental attitudes, but one study by Vest and Arndt, they utilized the low environmental contingencies of, they utilized the environmental contingencies of self-worth scale to see if people who derive greater sense of self-worth from being good environmentalists will show an increase or decrease if mortality salience is present. And they actually found that people with low ECSW related to less concern for the environment, which would be expected. So they concluded that mortality salience impacts environmental attitudes according to the extent to which individuals derive their self-esteem from being supportive of environmental issues. So the specific aims of this study, we'd like to measure whether individuals higher in RWAs display more or less concern for environmental issues. Same with childhood punishment, to see if just merely childhood punishment experiences would cause more or less concern for the environment. Also, by introducing the mortality salience manipulation to analyze the effects on environmental attitudes according to RWA and childhood punishment, and also to analyze the effects. So now to the hypotheses. So in terms of childhood punishment, we hypothesize that individuals higher in childhood punishment will exhibit less concern for the environment. Same with right-wing authoritarianism, because the two tend to be related. When as RWA goes up, concern for the environment goes down. We also used the measure that Vest and Arndt introduced in order to see if people who derive their sense of self-worth from the environment would exhibit, and we're going on their findings, and we hypothesized that people who do derive the greater sense of self-worth from being an environmentalist will exhibit greater concern for the environment. And then in each case, introduce the effect of mortality salience. So following mortality salience, we think that concern for the environment will decrease among people high in childhood punishment, but an increase among those who are low in childhood punishment. Similar with RWA, after mortality salience, there will be a decrease in environmental concern amongst high RWAs and an increase amongst low RWAs. and following mortality salience, environmental concern will increase amongst high ECSWs and decrease amongst lower ECSWs as best in our time. So to collect the data, we used about an hour-long survey, 187 items made up within 11 scales. So there were two versions of the survey, one with mortality salience condition and another with a neutral, emotionally neutral food preference condition, in which we just simply asked you, what are your food preferences, what would you take if you were to go on a picnic? And that serves as our control. Now, except for this change in condition, the surveys were identical. They were issued, and the random assignment was taken care of by socialsci.com, which is an online data collection platform. And participants had to complete the scales in order and were instructed to finish the entire thing in one sitting. So here are just some of the measures that we used. Right-wing authoritarianism I've been talking about a lot. And underneath each is an example of what would, if you were to agree with this statement, that would represent a higher score in each respective scale. So an example of high RWA statement: the established authorities generally turn out to be right about things, while radicals and protesters are usually just loudmouths, showing off their ignorance. Social dominance orientation is related to the power differentials between groups in society. So a high SDO statement: some groups are simply inferior to other groups. The ECSW scale that I've mentioned is pretty straightforward. My self-esteem is influenced by how good or bad of an environmentalist I am, and that would represent high contingency of self-worth. The global warming scale, just essentially how much do you think that global warming is occurring right now. The NEP scale is more concerned with the role that humans play in environmental destruction. So a high score would be indicated by when humans interfere with nature. It often produces disastrous consequences. And then the childhood punishment scale is simply just asking about people's childhood experiences. For instance, when you were a specific age, what would either or parent have done if you had stolen $1? It gives other examples such as talk back to them or broken a rule, so on and so forth. And the mortality salience manipulation is just simply two open-ended questions. The first, please write down as specifically as you can what you think will happen to you as you physically die and once you are dead, and then ask you to briefly describe the emotions that thinking about death arouses in you. So those randomly assigned to the control condition received an emotionally neutral food preference question, as I mentioned. The participants for our survey were recruited through UMass Boston through a broadcast email, as well as through recruiting and Psych 101 classes. And we also advertised through the Metro local newspaper and on Craigslist. Our total end value was 272 participants. Roughly 200 were recruited from UMass Boston, and the rest were supplemented from the ads. There are 182 females in the sample and 90 males. The mean age was 29 years old, ranging from 18 to 80. 184 participants ID'd as white. 33 is Asian American, 20 is Latino or Latina, 18 is African American, 17 is other. There were 143 who self-identified as liberal or strongly liberal, 30 who identified as conservative or strongly conservative, 70 who said neither, and 29 who said that they didn't know. The mean income of our sample was $23,335, ranging from $0 to $160,000. So we used a linear regression analysis in order to analyze the data. Linear regression calculates the relationship between each of the independent variables listed in the sample, the effect that these variables have on this dependent variable at the bottom while controlling for the rest of the variables within the table. So the dependent variables listed down here, in this case we're looking at environmental attitudes as measured by NEP, which is New Environmental Paradigm, and the Global Warming Scale aggregated together. We aggregated these two scales because they sort of measured different aspects of environmental concern, and they had high reliability. Taken together, the alpha was 0.931. So I'm going to take you through each finding one by one, sort of explain what they mean. So first we're going to look at the main effects. That's just the effect of a single independent variable on our dependent variable. So if we look at RWA, you can see that it's highly significant, the 3 zeros at the end, and it's negatively correlated with concern for the environment, as we expected. So that just means that as RWA scores go up, concern for the environment goes down. This corresponds with our hypothesis. Next